Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us in conference room 2. We have 4 presentations for you to divulge in and take some information from, and certainly engage with our speaker. The first one today, until 11:55, is looking at the role of connectivity in the future of food. So Hector Gibson Fleming has kindly joined us, the CEO at Wessex Internet, and he's going to be looking at the current state of connectivity, the vision for IoT and 5G within agriculture itself, and the importance of building the ecosystem to enable the connectivity to flourish. So fantastic. I'll leave that to you, Hector, and over to you. Thanks.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning into this this session. I think it's always a bit of a funny one. It's coming to these rural conferences as a telecoms company, and interestingly, initially many people say, well, sort of, as a telecoms company is an industry that has very low trust within the farming community. And that's certainly something that we've seen, but actually with us as a background, we started out as a farming company. So my family business is a farming contracting and a farming business. And actually we moved into telecoms with the intention of solving the challenges that we had around connectivity on our farm back in 2010. And since then, we've been building infrastructure for local farms and local communities across Dorset, Wiltshire, Somerset and Hampshire. And since then, maybe some of the people in this call will know us or will have connectivity from us, but we're primarily a fixed broadband company. We started building fixed point wireless and built up until 2016 a very significant fixed point wireless network that covered around sort of 14,000 properties in terms of availability. And then we since then have started building significant amounts of full fiber as a full fiber operator. And the difference that we have is that we don't see farming communities and local communities and rural properties as a sort of distraction to the profitable area of telecoms. That is our core market. So we're constantly building connectivity out for really rural communities in a kind of area that this small mast here that looks out across southwest Somerset is an example of. And so we really understand some of the challenges that farming communities face. And we're very excited about some of the potential that 5G and connectivity in farming can have in terms of enabling the ecosystem for an enormous amount of the agritech that other people are developing. And so in 2019, we started working with Dorset Council to pull the 5G Rural Dorset Consortium together to further our interest in, as we cannibalize a lot of our wireless network onto full fiber, what is the future for the wireless network that we built and the expertise that we have, and is there any way that we can turn that to benefit the farming communities that we've served with that wireless in a very different way? And so I think there's some really exciting bits that we're looking at across the project, and certainly I'm very excited about how we see smaller companies enabling a lot of the connectivity challenge, or solving a lot of the connectivity challenges that I think are presented by the major network operators. So 5G Rural Dorset's a consortium. These are some of, I think these are pretty well all, certainly some of the major partners. Obviously, in the area that we're working with, I think the primary partners are Dorset Council, who are leading the whole project. Ourselves, Vodafone on the IoT side, Telent and Small Robot Company, and University Strathclyde and Neutral Networks on the sort of higher capacity, fast data side. And I'll run through some of the things that we're doing there. As a background, I think this is from a recent NFU 2020 study. I think something that we all know is that connectivity in rural areas is still very poor. So the study there was the respondents said that 20% of them said they felt like they had sufficient superfast broadband. 80% of them had internet on their phone, and so obviously are looking to consume broadband. And now with everything that's happened in the last year, looking to consume fast broadband, and 93% saying it's essential for their business. And I think that some of the challenges that we're seeing. If you talk about 32% of that study saying they've got less than 2 megs a second, a lot of things that we've taken for granted and everyone's taken for granted in the last year just aren't possible. And it's something that we look at and talk about to a lot of communities, and whether it be from the social and loneliness aspect right the way through to business automation and taking advantage of a lot of the opportunities we see, broadband connectivity is a real challenge and something that needs solving. But if you then move across to outdoor coverage is a much bigger problem, and 82% of the coverage area actually leaves a massive area of rural businesses without any 4G coverage at all. And so if you take that, we're going to have pretty well 100% of all of the towns and cities. If you sub that down to be what is considered to be rural, which is probably 60% of the landmass of the UK, it'll be much lower than 80% outdoor coverage. And I think that's a challenge we've all got to face as an industry, in that the reality is that it now costs an MNO between 250 and 500,000 to put one of their major masts up. And despite what's been done in the last 2 years from them in what I think we all think a fairly underhand way to reduce their rental prices, it's still not viable to build those masts. If your only off-taker is a few people walking on some footpaths and 1 or 2 farmers. And I think the industry has got to work out how we can solve that problem and how we can solve that problem in a different way. And I think the reality with 5G is that there are three real corners to 5G in terms of what you hear about online, and what you hear about from the media is just the ultra fast broadband on your mobile phone in very high density areas. We're definitely not going to see that in a major way from maybe major network operators. I don't believe in any time soon in big chunks of rural areas, potentially in rural market towns. But outside that, to give that kind of coverage, you actually need more masts, not less. Every single one needs to have a full fiber connection at the bottom of it. And that's like very expensive and a challenge. And they may get some other way there, but I think the reality is to build a mast which has got 1,500 meters of 5G coverage at 100, 200 megs a second is I don't see the business case for major companies. The other 2 pillars of 5G are more encouraging. You've got the ultra low latency and the ultra reliable connectivity for machine-to-machine communications. So you've got machine-to-machine communications in one corner with where it needs to be reliable, it needs to happen, but it might not be a very large amount of data. And then you've got the low latency, then you've got the low connectivity requirement, but the other corners of the connectivity challenge, which is battery life and connectivity anywhere. And that's something which IoT and NB-IoT is being solved in a different way, where you can start to have 7 or 10-year battery life on devices that are communicating every 5 or 10 minutes. And those bits are more exciting from what we think the MNOs will provide. And we're working with Vodafone in our trial to look at IoT, where we think that is definitely going to be a reality, where the 5G will start to see some benefits. But on the private connectivity, we see that, on the high-speed connectivity, something that may need to be a private network challenge, and that's one of the things we're looking at. So I think the challenges, or necessarily the farming challenges, that we see lots of people innovating in Agritech devices and Agritech systems, but unless we can get the connectivity to work, we don't think we'll see the full benefit of the ecosystem. And I think most people see that as a challenge. We see it as a potential, as an opportunity for the industry to start to solve that. But we don't necessarily see the MNOs, the traditional major network operators, in terms of the mobile operators being able to solve that problem. And so the opportunity is for smaller companies to come in and look at how we can break price barriers and how we can break ways of working to look at new opportunities for dedicated connectivity. And so what we're interested in, our role as part within the 5G Rural Dorset project, and what Wessex Internet and Vodafone and others are working with Vodafone to consume their IoT coverage, is looking at is, can we make Agritech work seamlessly? We don't want to go and develop end devices or develop systems on online platforms, but we're interested in helping people consume them to create an ecosystem which works really seamlessly. And so the vision for us is that essentially private high bandwidth connectivity enables a paradigm of technological change. So the work that we're doing that I think is particularly exciting as a recent extension to our project is working with a small robot company. They have got, as an example of the challenge they face, they've got some fantastic robots coming out that they're developing. When we started speaking to them, they said, yeah, well, we get that it would be nice to be able to communicate with them live, but it's just a challenge we don't see as solvable at the moment, so we're not working on it. And we said, so why not come on, be part of our program, and we can look at if we can solve that challenge and look at how we can create a radically new model for how that works. And so we're working with them to put 5G connectivity in their robots. And just to give an example of where that has a change for them without actually any new specific sort of agritech technology. So at the moment, if they do a map of a field, that field map and weeds might not be such a problem, but let's say it's a slug map of a field, and they want to be able to come through and do an accurate spray or electrolysis or electrocution of something in that field, pest control in that field, where the benefit is that if we can do that accurately, we can reduce 80% of the spray needed, or we can do it without any spray if there are other methods. But that requires that analysis or the recording to spray or action time to be very short. At the moment, they run the robot through the field. They collect the data on a hard drive. The hard drive is taken back to the office where it gets uploaded and the processing can start. So if a man goes out with the machine for a day, you're not actually starting any of the analysis until the next day. So you're talking 24 to 48 hours by the time you've turned the analysis back around and you can get back in the field again. Well, for pest control, that's not going to work because they're going to have moved and changed. Even for weed control, 2-3 days, you might have whisked your weather window that allowed you to go and do what you needed to do there. And you know, when we see that breaking down, we're seeing a degradation in the system that doesn't necessarily allow the benefit of that technology. And so the exciting thing about the 5G is the ability to reliably take large chunks of data off that robot. Real time doesn't necessarily need to be in every single corner of the field, but probably at least half of the field coverage having that kind of 100 meg plus connectivity. We can update those very high resolution photos and upload them to the cloud, process them in like an edge data center, and send them back to the next robot that doesn't need to be pre-configured and have that data uploaded before it leaves the workshop or leaves the office in the morning. And so you then have the ability to potentially, you're within the realms of possibility to have one robot starting at the beginning of the field, mapping the data, and by the time it's come out the end, we're starting to go and do action that work with whatever of the process that is going to come off the back of the mapping happens. And I think that's really exciting, and that's where we see some of those benefits coming together. But to do that, the kind of mast that we're looking at would have around 1,500 meters of coverage from its base station. We think we can build, this is all of the operations, pull fiber in, build the mast and have it live. At the moment within trial software and some of the kit that we're using, we see as being very expensive, and we're seeing month on month changes in the price of this 5G technology as it goes from research and development into live use. But at the moment we're looking at around 25 to 30,000 pounds to build a mast, possibly slightly more than that, depending on whether you need 360 coverage or coverage in one angle, and depending on whether you can share the computing equipment that runs the mast between 2 or 3 masts, or whether you need one for each mast. But it's that kind of order of magnitude, which is already looking at being sort of 10 times cheaper than building the kind of mobile tower that we are looking at for 4G that's currently running mobile infrastructure around the country. But we would like to get that, I think full lifetime, it's possible that may even be half or a third of that. So if you're looking at having that kind of coverage that can be built flexibly for the farmer, according to coverage requirements that the farmer dictates or the companies that are putting the ecosystem together dictate, we then have a real opportunity to allow people to take this into their own hands and solve coverage challenges. And I think we're some way off to seeing this ecosystem change, but it's really exciting to be able to see that on the ground at scale within the trials that we're running. So I think from that time, that private bandwidth is certainly a very exciting area. The other side of the trial is Vodafone already has nationwide NB-IoT coverage, which is narrowband IoT coverage, which is a very efficient way of communicating between devices and a network. So that's looking at coverage from a typical mobile tower would be 10 to 15 kilometers. And that's already live. It's probably being used in most people's homes. If you have a smart meter managing your electricity, that is likely to be communicating through an MBIT network. So that's the kind of device that we're looking at. And that's really taking what people are already doing with some remote soil sensors and other sensing devices and being able to make that mass scale and very cheap. The pricing that we're working with on Vodafone is still in the very early stages. But what we're looking to be able to do there is they want to open this network up to other people, but at the moment it's not used by anyone apart from on massive contracts where they have 4 or 5 contracts in the UK with the 4 or 5 power companies and various other infrastructure operators in monitoring. What we're trying to do is open that up to the farming community with an opportunity to create very well integrated sensors that you can buy, deploy in a farm without having to worry about the coverage. And that's like another area that I think is really exciting, and where that really comes down to is an increase in data that allows proof points around the origin, the ecological benefits of food to the consumer, as well as proof points around the deliverability of things like elm schemes. So I think that's a really interesting other area. Apologies, sorry. That's now going to go on across. So yeah, that's a really interesting separate area that we're looking at that has also got enormous potential for the ecosystem in a different way. And I think to wrap all that together, what we see as the change is that technology to date has really been used in farming in many ways to potentially give some benefit off a tractor and access to CAN bus sensors, but what's generally been in a very expensive way. We think for farmers to see benefits, it needs to get cheaper on a per unit or per sensor device, more accessible, and we need to see data that's open and integrated into single platforms. And we believe doing that automatically, so not having to download data, manual processes to transfer data from equipment in the field into devices in the cloud and systems in the cloud is the way forwards. And we think that 5G is going to be absolutely crucial to that. And it's an exciting 5-year opportunity. And the rural Dorset trial has given a fantastic opportunity for us to try some of that in the wild and to experiment. I think for me, that's probably sort of most of what I really wanted to go over. I don't know, Jonathan, if you wanted to go through questions with people or how you want to manage the last 5 minutes. Nice to have. Okay, I'm not sure that I
great. Yeah.
Can see any questions. Oh, right, there we are. Sorry.
Yeah. Hi, Hector. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Thank you very, very much for that. With regard to your presentation, just for example, one question that I wanted to understand is that what sort of timeline are you looking at to get it rolled out within your rural area, and then from that, what's the timeline for, say, your area to connect with other parts of England and the UK, etc.? So can you explain a bit about the timeline, please?
So yeah, I mean, I think there's really two areas here that we're looking at and that splits into the IoT technology and then the high capacity or high bandwidth connections. I think with the IoT, there's the opportunity to scale that much more quickly. So for the next year, we're in a trial period where it will be limited to the trials that we're currently doing in our trial areas, which are across a number of sites in Dorset. But as soon as we finish that, if we see an opportunity for a product that Vodafone is willing to take to market off the back of what we've worked with them, then there aren't very many barriers to entry for getting that ecosystem live. We're working with live platforms that are consumable today in terms of actually selling or consuming that data as part of the trial, and we're also working with live coverage that is nationwide. So that is possible that in 2 to 3 years, at a maximum, we could be seeing devices that people could buy, consume through an app on their phone, very easily onboard and manage at a low cost. The private connectivity piece, I think, is much more of an ecosystem challenge. I think that we'll see some early adopters in 2 or 3 years if we're really successful. But I think that for people to see the benefit of that, we need to be looking at having that ecosystem come together. If someone's going to say, I need 2 or 3 masts on my farm, am I going to spend 30 to 50 grand doing that? You're not going to be doing that until we're seeing ecosystem changes around, like actually seeing real farming benefits of having to buy less tractors or different tractors or using different types of machinery. I think there is an ecosystem opportunity to cut massive chunks of the operating costs out of a farm by doing using this equipment, but we need to see the ecosystem come together to make that happen. And so I think that will be much more incremental. We'll see what we see in most markets when you have technological change. There'll be the early adopters in 2 to 5 years time, and that might be 5 or 10%, and then we'll start to see that come through as the early adopters encourage investment, which sees that change. And I think it will definitely happen. There will be some places where 5G will be available, and lucky farms which happen to be in coverage and will be able to do it without building their own network. And maybe that will be a proof point of some of the technologies. But I think it's you're talking a 3 to 5 year period for the higher speed private networks.
So is there an incentive then further with the mobile phone providers like your partner that you're working with, or the mast providers, Vodafone? Is there an incentive for them to look at perhaps maybe funding some more development of masts located in strategic areas so people would use their network and get connected quicker? Or
I think it's a possibility. I mean, I think we all know the challenges of mobile coverage in rural areas, and in terms of traditional mobile coverage, I'm not sure it's something like I can add a lot of benefit to that discussion. I think the 5G connectivity will look very different to 4G connectivity in high capacity networks. So, I think where you look at 5G for ultra fast, you're talking about the interest for those operators first is going to be how do we build up to shopping centres and sports stadiums and high streets, where we're talking about having, if you take Wembley Stadium as an example, the challenge is how do you get 100,000 people to have 100 megs on a mobile phone in a very small area? Like that's where the opportunities around the high-speed broadband over 5G is seen as an opportunity for those operators, and that's where they're ultimately going to focus. In rural areas, I think that most of what you or I need on a mobile phone is done by 4G today. Just getting broadband connectivity, it's going to work just as well over 4G as it does over 5G. There may be some upgrades in the network that sits behind that mast, and a lot of the 5G innovation from MNO or from the network operators is around innovation within their network that allows them to be much more flexible and much more scalable with what they do. That may mean you see other people being able to use Vodafone's masts in different ways with different service levels and providing slightly different products. But it's not necessarily going to give better physical coverage and necessarily seeing physical equipment upgrades at the top of the mast on a major scale. So I think that's sort of there's a lot more to 5G than the Daily Mail necessarily reports when they talk about 5G being rolled out on a high street or an area in particular. So there are benefits that we will see, but they won't necessarily be seen particularly in faster broadband to a particular device.
So have you got a timeline whereby that you're going to be publishing results about what's I suppose work that's been ongoing and what you found out, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So to give you an idea, we started the trial in sort of May last year. We've obviously some challenges of kicking a collaboration project with 10 partners off in the middle of COVID, but I think we're largely on the plan that we set in October 19, which is great. And we have done the network, the analysis, design, put the trials together, looked at what our use cases would be, what the problems we're trying to solve, and we are now in the deployment phase. We're building infrastructure at the moment. We're expecting delivery of the radio heads and equipment by the end of this quarter, and the masts that we need for the trials that we're in the areas we're building are already physically in place, and we'll be starting to provision them in the next few months. So we'll be doing trials from early summer. obviously with an eye to having the next farming year as the real key year. Officially, the trial ends at the moment in April next year because the government doesn't understand about farming years, so they're fairly inflexible about that. But we would expect to get an extension to the trial to be able to complete the full farming year to the end of or to next summer, essentially, and with results published, probably initial results published of what we've seen by to next April at the time that the trial is due to end, with a full set of results published in the summer or
right.
Sort of autumn next year in terms of what we found and what we've seen from the trials we're running.
Great stuff. Well, Hector, thank you ever so much for that interesting presentation about the work that you're doing. I wish you the best of luck in continuing your effort. I know you're putting it together through COVID times. Obviously, we're still slightly on the edge of that, but it seems like you've been making your way forward, and we look forward to the results. For the audience here, Hector is online. He's got availability to have one-to-one meetings with you, available through the message chat as well if you have any more questions or want to speak to him. But Hector, thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me. Cheers, guys.
Bye.